Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today as we discuss a matter of great national and global importance and something that's been in the news nonstop for the last few weeks. Situation in Afghanistan, what it means for the people of Afghanistan, what it means for our country, and what it means for the world. I want to thank the members of the Chancellor's Council Executive Committee, the Centurions, Friends, Presidents, Regents, and others for participating in tonight's event. I want to especially thank our Chairman, Matt Ramsey, for participating tonight as well. And thank you for continuing to keep the Chancellor's Council going as a vibrant organization for great discussion and great meetings, even though they're on Zoom right now. We'll correct that soon, I hope. And then you'll be able to join us at Bower House for in-person events and dinner afterwards. So we've convened some of the best minds that we have available to us in the UT system who've been studying this issue for a couple of decades in the most case. The discussion reflects the importance of UT's ability to support and convene these experts who represent a tremendous breadth of knowledge in both academia and in national service. So some quick notes. I will introduce our speakers. They'll focus on several topics related to Afghanistan, the past, the current, and the future. The discussion will take about 45 minutes, and then we'll turn to all of you in the audience for question and answers, which I will get on my Zoom so I can edit out Gordon's questions and ask questions from the rest of you.
We need a question from Gordon.
What's that?
We always need a question from Gordon.
Yeah, you do. That's how you know you're in the right place. Okay, so who's going to lead us through this discussion? First, Aaron O'Connell, an associate history professor at UT Austin, former United States Marine Corps Special Advisor to General Petraeus in Afghanistan, and editor of our latest longest war, Losing Hearts and Minds in Afghanistan. Aaron previously served in the Obama administration as Director of Defense Policy and Strategy on the National Security Council staff. He taught military history at the U.S. Naval Academy and is a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, a role in which he's advised the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii, and the ISAF commander in Afghanistan. Only the military has more acronyms than academia. Jeremy Suri is the Mac Brown Distinguished Chair of Leadership in Global Affairs and a History and Public Affairs professor at the LBJ School. He's a widely read and respected author and commentator on Afghanistan and foreign affairs. His work focuses on decision-making, leadership, globalization, international relations, and modern history. His books include Liberty's Surest Guardian, American Nation Building from the Founders to Obama, and Foreign Policy Breakthroughs, Cases in Successful Diplomacy. Paul Edgar is Associate Director of the Clements Center for National Security. He has a scholarly focus on the history of diplomacy and war and holds a PhD in Middle Eastern languages and cultures from the University of Texas. He's also a former U.S. Army officer and Army Ranger who served in Afghanistan in multiple advisory and combat capacities, as well as in Iraq. And last but not least, General Robert Neller, U.S. Marine Corps retired, a distinguished senior fellow at the Strauss Center and the Clements Center, a retired four-star general who served as the 37th Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps and at the Pentagon overseeing support for troops in Afghanistan, in Iraq. I am delighted, impressed, awed by this group, and so pleased that we have an opportunity to talk with them tonight about an issue that is so important and that I know all of you have been thinking and reading a great deal about. So, Dr. O'Connell, thank you for leading the conversation, and let's get going.
Great, thank you, sir. And thank you to all of you for joining us, even if virtually. I know it's not as pleasant as being here at the Bower House, but I would like to thank you for participating in this personally, because the issue of Afghanistan is very close to all of our hearts, and for different reasons. Some of us served there, some of us have followed it as scholars, some of us had to oversee all of the support and the amount of attention and leadership for the running of these wars. So it's something that deserves time and attention, not just now in this rather difficult moment, but always. So we've got a variety of both scholars and practitioners here, and our goal will be to go through sort of the basic questions of the past, the present, and the future of Afghanistan. And we'll do that with 4 questions that we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes on each before turning to your questions. The first is, how do we get here? What's the backstory to the U.S. going to Afghanistan to hunt Osama bin Laden and to the Al-Qaeda network? The second is, why did we stay so long, and what were we doing while we were there? That'll give us a chance to hear from some of us who served in the war. Third, when and how did we leave, and why? Why we have just watched these rather difficult moments of August of a evacuation and a difficult end to the war for American troops. So why did that happen when it did? And finally, what's next for Afghanistan and for American interests in the region? What are we going to try to do in the future? How will we protect our interests? And how can we fulfill our obligations to those we served with? So to start, we'll begin with a little bit of history and turn to our historian, Jeremy Surrey, Mac Brown Professor of History and Leadership. Can you tell us a little bit of the Cold War context? How is it that the United States after 9/11 goes to Afghanistan to hunt a group founded by a Saudi and an Egyptian with a lot of weird connections to Pakistan? It all goes back to the Cold War, does it not?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Aaron. And before I start, I do want to thank my colleagues for being here. It's an honor to be on this panel and an honor to be speaking to the Chancellor's Council again. I think it's been 7 or 8 years since I last had the opportunity to speak to this group. Aaron, you ask exactly the right question. The United States didn't decide in the late 1970s that Afghanistan was central to our security. But it was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 that led to American concern about this region. This was a period in the late 1970s when there were reasons to believe that the Soviet Union might have been pulling ahead of the United States in certain strategic areas. And there was a concern that the Soviet Union, through its allies in Afghanistan and then through its direct intervention, was gaining a foothold on the Middle East and on Central Asia, areas that were crucial to the United States, especially during a period of oil shortage in the United States. So although there's no oil in Afghanistan, the concern was this was evidence of Soviet movement toward the key areas in the Middle East that were going to be important to the United States. So President Carter, in 1979, and many watching this remember this, responded to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan initially by publicly condemning this, not participating in the Olympics in 1980, and beginning a covert set of operations to provide aid to this group that most people didn't know about at the time, called the Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen was the basis for the Afghan resistance and really the regional resistance to Soviet intervention. And it led by the Reagan administration to the provisioning of major weapons, including Stinger missiles, to this group of what we would today call insurgents, but they were good insurgents in our eyes because they were fighting the Soviet Union.
And they, of course, some of those groups will make up the bulk of the Taliban, but they're not Al-Qaeda. So can we just separate out how is it that a Saudi and Egyptian-led group that fought in Afghanistan but then stayed began attacking the United States and leading to 9/11? A little bit of context.
Absolutely. So Osama bin Laden in particular, and a number of the others who were fighting for the Mujahideen with American assistance, became radicalized. As their resistance produced the fruits of Soviet difficulty and then Soviet withdrawal by the late 1980s, they then turned their eyes to trying to liberate the region not just from Soviet control, but from what they saw as all kinds of foreign intervention. And it was a radicalization that occurred both within their religious thinking and within their militaristic thinking. It's very important to understand that these were actually heretics from mainstream Islam. This was not the region's Islamic leaders turning against the United States. This was a group of ragtag fighters who believed that they now had the legitimacy to make claims on Islam and claims on control of the region. And so they mobilized, organized around Osama bin Laden and others who had resources, and began what they saw as a larger movement to free the region of foreign control. Ironically, that was the very moment when the United States increased its presence in the region during the first Gulf War, when American soldiers, maybe some of whom are on the dais here with me, actually were stationed in Saudi Arabia for the first time. And it is that presence of the United States in the region that became a target. As the Soviets had been the target in the late 70s and early 1980s, now the United States became the target for Al-Qaeda.
Certainly, the Gulf War is one of the principal events radicalizing Osama bin Laden and causing him to be sure that the next step is to now begin attacking the United States. So there are, of course, a number of attacks before the 9/11 attack, the embassy bombings of '98, the USS Cole in 2000, but it is the spectacular attack that was planned in Afghanistan but conducted by almost exclusively Saudis. That is the 9/11 attack that then forces the United States to respond. And the decision made within a week is that the U.S. will go to Afghanistan to go after bin Laden and to overthrow the Taliban government, which had been harboring bin Laden and giving him sanctuary in Afghanistan.
Aaron, if I might just add it, I mean, it's important that there had been a decision made before that moment that the United States would not intervene in Afghanistan, right? Many might remember a whole series of Taliban atrocities. And it was both the Clinton administration and the Bush administration in its first months that believed the United States should not be involved in the region. So I'm just underlining your point about how significant the events of 9/11 were in almost overnight, right, flipping American strategic views of the region.
General Neller, if I can turn to you, you haven't served in Afghanistan, but you certainly lived through 9/11 and then the initial push as a senior Marine officer already for the United States to go to Afghanistan and overthrow the Taliban and go after al-Qaeda with a very novel mix of air power and special forces and Marines arriving very quickly. That all seemed to produce victory by December of 2001, a quick 1.5-month war. Why isn't the war over at that point? Can the U.S. just walk away after taking out the al-Qaeda camps if the goal is to make sure that this is never again a safe haven for terrorism?
Well, it's hard to believe that, in 3 days it'll be 20 years since 9/11. I think we all remember where we were that day and fundamentally changed our nation. So, there was success, but Osama bin Laden was not captured or killed, which I think was the mission. So now we're in Afghanistan. You've got an insurgency or a civil war going on between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban, and we sided with the Northern Alliance, used their capabilities with U.S. air power and special forces advisors to defeat the Taliban, and now you have to have a government. To me, the mission in Afghanistan has always been no longer allow a safe haven for terrorists to attack the United States. And I could make the case that that mission has been successful, even to this day. And we can talk about the ability to sustain that mission after what's transpired in the last few weeks. So we were there, and I don't know all the details. I mean, it's 20 years. Like you said, Aaron, I didn't serve there. I've been in and out of that place maybe 40, 50 times with Marine advisors, working with the Afghan military. Remember, the U.S. pulled out of Iraq in 2011, but there was peace. There was no fighting going on at that time. And we weren't able to reach an accommodation with the Iraqi government. But the Taliban and the relationship they had with Pakistan and other things, there was always this low level. And the U.S. forces left Iraq and they went into Afghanistan in significant numbers, and then there was a successful suppression of the Taliban, and then we started to draw down. And I think we realized that maybe we overstepped our objectives. And you got the Karzai government, and then you got the Ghani government, and you got all the politics, and so we ended up where we ended up. And there are a lot of soul searching, a lot of people wondering. I don't think anybody, you wanted to stay, but it's like what Colin Powell said, pottery barn rules. You break it, you own it. So what are you going to do? We want to leave. Okay, how do we leave? Or how do we get down to the point where it's sustainable? And I believe we were at that point. But previous administration and the current administration decided that with the peace treaty they had with the Taliban, assuming they were going to comply with it, that we were going to leave. I'm not going to speculate on what the best military advice was because I haven't been in the building in 2 years. And we can talk all day long about whether the withdrawal or the retrograde or the NEO. It was a NEO. NEOs are always messy.
Non-combatant evacuation operation, another acronym.
They're always messy, but and particularly when you have no forces on the ground and you got to reinsert yourself. So what was the mission? No sanctuary, protect the homeland.
And by the way, you're correct, sir, that if we take the measures of Americans killed by foreign terrorists since 9/11, we have succeeded in that because there have been between 1 to 20 deaths total per year since 9/11 from terrorism. And those aren't even that's not just terrorism coming from overseas connected to Al-Qaeda, that's all terrorism. So I think that if the goal is to protect Americans from foreign terrorist attacks, one can point to some success. Whether the presence in Afghanistan was instrumental to that, I think is probably a separate question.
We're going to know that for a number of years. I mean, there's a lot of thoughts and emotion, particularly those that have served there or know people that have served there or been there. And right now, I think everybody's emotional level is a little bit raw. So my recommendation would be that everybody kind of breathe through their nose a while and see how this sorts out. That said, losing 13 Americans, 11 Marines, a corpsman, and an Army Staff Sergeant at the evacuation point at that one gate, their actions allowed the evacuation of well over 100,000 Americans and other nationalities. And I don't think we should minimize that or forget that. And I mean, looking down the road, the fact that we still have young men and women that are willing to stand up, raise their hand, take an oath, and go in harm's way and do hard stuff, I think puts us in a good place as long as we can sustain that. But I'll let you go on to the next question.
Thank you, General. I'm glad you brought up Pakistan, because our next question is, what were we doing there and why did we stay so long? And it's without a doubt that the constant help to the Afghan Taliban provided by the Pakistani government while they were partners with us in going after Al-Qaeda in Pakistan was a major reason why the Taliban stayed strong and eventually overwhelmed the country. So, Paul, you've served in Afghanistan in 2009 when you were a brigade operations officer, but can you get us up from even before 2009? We overthrow the Taliban, it's very successful, it's true as General Neller explained, Al-Qaeda senior leadership gets away, but we stand up a government very quickly, it has international support, the UN is involved, but then starts the problem of both trying to do a counterterrorism mission of going after any Al-Qaeda remaining in the country and providing some degree of security and help and nation building and state building to this new Afghan government we created. We do that from 2002 to 2020 in one form, or 21 in one form or another. So can you get us from initial success in 2002 all the way up to the surge when you were serving there?
Right. So I guess first of all, if I could say thanks. I know everybody else has said thanks. The University of Texas and the University of Texas system has been incredibly generous to me and to my family, both in my PhD studies, and now I have a daughter who is a junior. She's on the national championship rowing team. So thank you. And I know that interrupts the flow, but everyone was saying thank you. I thought I needed to really say thank you.
Edit in applause.
So we're very grateful for you all. So I'll describe very briefly the first maybe 10 years of this war. And a lot of that has to do with how unexpectedly easy it was in the first few years. The Taliban were gone within months, as you mentioned. We thought that whatever came next was going to be similarly easy. And our attention began to, it's hard to talk about this era, or impossible to talk about this era without talking about Iraq and how our attention shifted and our resources shifted. I won't go into that, but it's certainly worth mentioning. So in short, at first, Afghanistan was what we might call sort of an economy of force effort in the war, what we, at least at that time, were calling the war on terror.
That's a polite way to say we're not going to give you very much money.
Right, well, or forces, etc. So having, for example, having a single infantry brigade in all of Afghanistan, mainly in the east, or in Kabul in the east, was not unusual for the first few years. So these infantry brigades would do generally do long patrols over 1 to 2 weeks, and would rotate around the country based on intelligence or sort of political objectives, low-level political objectives that we may have had at the time. And that was sustainable. We went a long time. We'd have a whole brigade rotate through without a single casualty, or without with very few injuries during that time. And I can't remember exactly the year. I was in Iraq when it began to happen. I don't know if it's 2006, plus or minus a year. that the insurgency in Afghanistan began to gather a little bit of a head of steam. But again, we were so immersed in Iraq. That was the surge in Iraq, and so it had to take second place. As we were able to shift resources, so this is probably about 2008, 2009, slowly.
The surge in Iraq is successful.
Right.
Troops are now available for Afghanistan.
So we're able to move people and equipment, not directly from Iraq to Afghanistan, but as we rotate people back from Iraq, get them reset, then we're able to move those units subsequently into Afghanistan. And that's when I was there. I was there in 2008 a few times to get a sense of where we were going in eastern Afghanistan, in the provinces Paktika, Paktia, and Khost. Those provinces were our military responsibility. And then I was there for most of 2009. And that was, so I would say that this is the height not simply of the surge in Afghanistan, it's also the height of our approach that we often called counterinsurgency. And in short, it wasn't simply fighting. It was development of civil society. It was development of, or attempts to develop civil society. It was attempts to develop a political society. And what, one of the phrases that we had was connect the people to their government. In my experience, I developed another phrase, connecting the government to itself, right? And sometimes it was very frustrating trying to connect the provincial level government, for which we were still relatively well resourced. We had lots of State Department Foreign Service officers leading provincial reconstruction teams. We had National Guard agribusiness development teams who knew animal husbandry, who knew how to sort out, do soil samples and figure out what would grow better here than is currently being grown. So there was a big effort to develop Afghanistan holistically, right?
To go beyond just trying to hunt down the threats and the Al-Qaeda remnants, but to actually reconstruct, support, advise, and create the nation state. It is the nation, coin and nation building are the military application of nation building. So, okay.
No, I think that's fair to say. So I think it's mixed. We had some successes, and we could point to several of them. But they're anecdotal, right? And they're small, and we were never able to knit them together with the national government in the way that we wanted, right? So that to me was certainly a frustration, that we were pouring resources in, time and lives, because we were also fighting all this time as well, and we were conducting counterterrorism fights too. But we weren't able to get traction with a government that sort of stuck, right? With a government that, a central government that could have good relations with the provinces, that could have a dialogue and exchange resources and help. So that was a frustration, right?
That is, yes. Would you, Jeremy, can I bring you back in on this and ask, so there's no doubt that the attempts to build the governance in Afghanistan never take hold in any serious way. There's massive corruption, there's serious problems. The improvements on the health front and the education front are real and substantial. Life expectancy increases by a decade for the Afghan population during the time we were there. But the reason all during this time, even with massive improvements in literacy, education, and health, the Taliban continues to grow stronger with direct, only barely concealed help from Pakistan. Can you just tell us why Pakistan might support the Taliban and why they, even while trying to be a partner with the United States, continue to support the U.S.'s enemies, so much so that President Trump breaks off security assistance by 2018 or so?
It's such a great and important question. The Pakistanis are a very, very close American ally, particularly in terms of intelligence cooperation, but they're also an American adversary. And one of the points I often like to make to students is you can be an ally and adversary at the same time. These categories are not mutually exclusive. The Pakistanis have a serious security concern about India. And they're afraid that Afghanistan will become part of India's reach into their territory. They see Afghanistan as a strategic buffer for themselves. And it is in their interest, therefore, to have a group like the Taliban that they can rely upon to be firmly anti-Indian and firmly in their pockets in many respects. And so the ISI, which is the intelligence service in Pakistan, maintains very close, effective relationships with the Taliban, probably to this day much closer than anything the United States has with the Taliban. And it makes perfect sense from a Pakistani point of view. The challenge for the United States is that we need the Pakistanis, but they're also the problem at the same time. And I think one of the key elements of diplomacy is learning to be better at nudging your allies into behaving well in the areas where they're challenging your interests. We provide the Pakistanis with an enormous amount of military and other forms of aid, but yet they continue to do things that every administration, Democrat or Republican, has not wanted them to do. One of the things they say when we ask them to improve is, if you push us too hard, we will collapse. And even worse Islamists, as they would put it, are in charge of the society, in charge of our nuclear weapons. So we're in a sense being tyrannized by the weakness of Pakistan, and this is a dilemma that no administration has worked its way through. The day after 9/11, Richard Armitage meets with the Pakistanis and reads them the Riot Act, Under Secretary of State, but that still doesn't work. For a short time they go along with us, but they are going to pursue their national interests, which will be for the foreseeable future, as they've been for the last 20 years, tied to the Taliban. And we have to recognize that and react to that with the realism that that requires.
We've only got about 15 minutes before we turn to your questions, so I think we should turn to what next in Afghanistan, and we'll have opportunities to reach back to the war if we need to. There are a series of consequences of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. They certainly affect the Afghan people, women in particular, but they also affect American security. We have been fighting a war and staying in Afghanistan because there has been a connection between our presence there and holding back a terrorist threat in the region. So there are security implications for the U.S. evacuation and the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. So there are humanitarian concerns. There are also political concerns, as Dr. Suri just went through. Afghanistan connects to our Pakistani politics and to our U.S.-Indian relations, and these are nuclear-armed nations, so we have to pay closely attention to them, even if Afghanistan is only a pawn in their game at times. So let's turn to that now. Jeremy, I'll ask you to start again. In terms of what next for the Taliban, the question literally on the president's desk is, should there be a path to recognizing the Taliban government and engaging in formal diplomacy with them? And while the immediate inclination might be no or hell no for most of us in our guts, if you want to do humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan, if you want to continue aid in education and literacy, if you want the UN to operate there, if you want aid workers to be safe there, you need to have a relationship with the government. So what's next politically for U.S. and Afghanistan as we cope with this rather tragic end to America's longest war?
Aaron, you framed that brilliantly. I'll say, as a historian, over the last 100 years, the United States has repeatedly tried to influence societies that we don't like for good reason by not recognizing them. Woodrow Wilson refused to recognize Russia after the revolution. We, for 20 years after World War II, refused to recognize Communist China. It was the great opening that Nixon and Kissinger undertook to open our relations with China. Here's what the historian has to say. Non-recognition has never served U.S. interests. We never benefit except for the ability to say we don't like a country by not recognizing them. The world of international relations is a world filled with villains of different kinds, and sometimes we're even that villain. And it's required, if we want to have influence, that we work with regimes. That does not mean we need to legitimize their bad behavior. What Ronald Reagan taught us was that you can work closely with the Soviet leadership, as he did for most of his first and second terms, and still condemn their behavior at the same time and exert influence through your relationship with them. And I think that's the only path forward with the Taliban. We need to recognize them. We need to build relationships. We should have an ambassador there. But at the same time, we need to be clear that in recognizing them, we are not legitimizing their behavior.
Okay, that's a pretty clear argument on the side for recognizing the Taliban. General Neller, do you want to?
I would say, looking back, I mean, Somalia was a good example. We knew who the adversary was, but we never stopped talking to him. Okay, talking is easy. Doesn't mean you're not going to take action, whether it be economic or political or diplomatic or even military action in response to behaviors which are not in your interest and are unacceptable to you. But I think it's a little early. So let's see. I mean, let's get the Americans, the few Americans that are left, and the other people that we can get out. So I think we should, for now, do what we have to do. Whether formal recognition follows or not, I think is a decision that. But I agree with the doctor. I think I don't ever see anything good happening by just cutting them off, because you never know. And part of me now, there's a lot of consequences, good and bad. As you kind of weigh what's a good thing? Well, now the Chinese, the Russians, the Pakistanis, the Iranians, they got to deal with this stuff. And it's not going to be all easy for them either. And we saved a whole bunch of money. The other downside is we were in the middle of those countries where we had intel collection and we had ISR and we were surveillance and we were collecting and we had contacts, and they didn't like it. Okay? So that's the downside. That's the downside of not being there. So we'll see how this plays out. Doing counterterrorism, as the current administration has said, from over the horizon and from distance. I don't doubt that our military can do that. Now, how effective they'll be, and particularly with the intelligence collection, not having people and all the people that were there giving us information. And I think it'll be certainly more challenging, but not impossible. So
when you say over the horizon, what you're referring to is instead of trying to fight al-Qaeda connected militants on the ground in Afghanistan, we can, whoever it is.
In the Arabian Peninsula, if you're using the means that we've used, which is unmanned aircraft flying long distances, but they have to have targeting information and all that, and those capabilities were operating out of Afghanistan. And to the best of my knowledge, they're not there anymore. So where are they going to operate from? And that means we have to have a base, and we have to have a foreign nation allow us to give us access, and then we have to reestablish ourselves there. And we're still in the region. We still got, friends, the Emiratis. We've got bases in the Fifth Fleet, and the U.S. Air Force has a major base at Al Udeid in Qatar. So there's capabilities there, and the Qataris have been engaged with the Afghans. They were the place in Doha for the peace talks and all that, and I think that's where our embassy is right now. In absentia, our embassy is in Doha. So again, things are going to play out. We'll see how it goes, but right now I think we do what we have to do to make sure everybody that we can get out of there, get out of there.
Great, thank you, sir. So that's the political context of this question of recognition. Maybe we spend a bit more time on the security way forward. We've started with this context that since 9/11, between 1 and 20 people have died from terrorism in the United States. So is there reason to think that now that we don't have troops in Afghanistan, the threat is going to go up? How will we mitigate that threat? Or is that an untested proposition? Is it just as likely that leaving Afghanistan will decrease the threat, as the principal grievance of the Taliban has always been, you're foreigners in our land and we want you to leave? Does anyone want to weigh on? Obviously, it's all prediction, and prediction is never wise on video, but does anybody want to weigh in on do we have any way to think about this, evidence on either side of the ledger, that leaving Afghanistan could make us more safe, or is it just irrefutable that it's going to make us less safe as American citizens?
I think we're in a different place today than we were 20 years ago, as far as our National Department of Homeland Security and all the different things we have, the no-fly lists, the information, the exchange with our partners and allies about information about people that might do us harm. That said, I think it remains to be seen what the Taliban relationship is going to be with al-Qaeda. We know that ISIS-K, which is no friend of the Taliban, or al-Qaeda, they were the ones that took credit for the attack on that one gate that killed hundreds of Afghans and 13 Americans. So I think we'll have to see. And I think we talked about recognition. I think any precondition for any recognition or any relationship with the Taliban has got to be based on the fact that, okay, I mean, no safe haven for any of these organizations. And how we'll be able to check that without...
ISIS-K is an ISIS affiliate that grew out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which then formed in Syria, which then created franchise branches all over the world. So the idea that if we are in a place, we can therefore control the terrorism is also, to a degree, an untested proposition.
The future. And then before 20 years ago, we found out about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We knew about the bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. We knew about the coal. Well, now you've got Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula. Now we got Boko Haram in Nigeria. Now we've got Al-Shabaab in Somalia. You've got Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines. So, and who knows what's going to happen with Al-Qaeda, traditional Al-Qaeda, who still, you know, some of their leaders, what was it, Zawahiri? I don't know, we don't know. I don't know where he is. He hadn't called me lately. So, I mean, not to be facetious about it, but you know, we got bin Laden, but I don't think we never got him, to the best of my knowledge. So
Lists of groups all over the world show that there still are groups connected to Al-Qaeda or their affiliates that the United States feels it's worth military action to.
For the support of the host nation, where these groups are, and where we try to help them in the way that they're willing to take, building their capacity, because they're attacking their societies.
I want to leave room for Paul, but I just want to underline the point the General made. I mean, from my perspective, historically, there's nothing sacred about Afghanistan as the site of terrorist threats to the United States. The threat to the United States, first of all, the main terrorist threat to the United States comes from within right now. Let's recognize that. More Americans have died because of white nationalists with guns than because of foreign terrorists. But when we're talking about foreign terrorism, it's not Afghanistan we have to worry about. It's the terrorist organizations. And they are in many, many places, far more places than they were before 9/11. That means that our focus should not be on Afghanistan, it should be on the terrorist organizations. And insofar as withdrawing from Afghanistan might allow us to focus more on the organizations and their diffuse networks, we might actually be more secure. I'm not guaranteeing that, but that's the possibility that this opens up for us in the use of our resources.
It's more than the possibility, it's the explicit rationale the Biden administration gave for its withdrawal. That the threat is diffuse, we should go after it where it's dangerous. That's not Afghanistan compared to the threat posed by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, posed by Al-Shabaab in Somalia, etc. Paul, I'll invite you to either weigh in on this thing.
So I hesitated at first because at first the question was isolated to Afghanistan, and I think you have to address the terrorist threat much more broadly. So I'm sorry for the hesitation, but thank you, General Neller, for expanding it to sort of where the question of terrorism belongs, which is worldwide, right? So, but the question of I prefer to look at it this way: that we gave up. We gave up a strategic position against terrorism and against potential other adversaries, including China, right? And we walked away. We chose to Afghanistan by leaving Afghanistan. So that's why we went in, right, to eliminate terrorism. But by the time we left, it was more than that, and the value was more than that. So, and we had arrived there, as I've mentioned to you outside of this moment. In some ways, you could say we arrived there by accident. Okay, sometimes in war, you succeed by accident. And one of the examples that comes to mind is submarine warfare in the Pacific Theater of Operations, right? It was much more devastating than we realized at the time. And later we find out, okay, this was really a significant part of what we were doing and we had no idea. And I think that's where we wound up. We found ourselves in a sustainable position that was advantageous to us, both in terms of terrorism and in terms of, if we're going to use the term, I hesitate a little bit, but great power competition. And we chose to walk away from it. So that, to me, that is a concern. I think that the pressure against the Taliban to be more moderate than they were pre-9/11 is real. Can we take advantage of that? I hope so. I hope that we can. I hope that we can. I would agree with a conditional recognition, right? Not automatic recognition, but then there are also some concerning signs, like Haqqani, who is now appointed a terrorist on our, a top 10 terrorist, is now their interior minister. So these are things that are not decided, as you've said. They're untested propositions, but they're not things to walk away from easily, right?
I guess I'll take the opposing view just for perhaps the sake of debate, so that everyone will have more than one position to consider on this crucial issue. I don't think that there's any real evidence that our presence in Afghanistan for 20 years made Americans safer. We can't prove a negative. There weren't the attacks, right? The bottom line is America has been safe from terrorism since 2001 by December, when the Taliban leaves and Al-Qaeda is routed, and the numbers support that in terms of Americans killed. If you want to talk about the global deaths of all the wars that are connected to the global war on terrorism, now we're talking about 900,000 dead around the world. So I'm not sure we yet know that being there was holding back the threat. There seems to be just as much evidence from both history and just present-day observations to show that our presence inflamed the threat and provided a cohesion to the group, a rallying cry, recruiting efforts that might not have been there had we left. But that argument was mostly left just to present more than one side, because we are now ready to pivot to questions, I believe. And I will now hand over the microphone.
Moderate all discussions from now on, regardless of topic. That was perfect. I appreciate that very much. We do have a few questions. And Gordon, thank you for always identifying yourself in the questions, so I know where not to go. The first question is one that actually I get to, by virtue of standing here, ask my own questions first and then others. But it's sort of the question that is on everybody's mind, and if you already answered this and I was too slow to get there, I apologize. But pretty much both Republicans and Democrats, it seemed like, at the end of the day, decided that it was time to get out of Afghanistan. And you could argue who first made that decision and how quickly they wanted to do it. There are a lot that's being argued every day in the papers. But is there a right way to do this, a wrong way to do it? Is there something here that was terribly flawed about the way this was done? Or regardless of how it was done or how along this process, at the end of the day, when the Taliban is going to be in charge of the country, does it matter how we left?
May I just add, so there's two ways we can approach this, gentlemen. One is how we left, literally the collapse of the security in Kabul, the non-combatant evacuation operations, and the month of August. But we can also broaden out to the Doha Agreement, the U.S. diplomacy to ending the war, and the way the war ended over the last year and a half, since President Trump made very clear we're pulling out, no strings attached. So why don't I invite people to comment on either?
I think that's great. And that's why you're the moderator and I'm the chancellor. It seems to me like if you start with the second part of that first,
Start with the longer story.
Right. So I'll start with the longer story, and then the far smarter people to my right and left can talk about what happened in the last month. I think it's quite clear, as JB said, that for at least the last 2 years, and I made this point in the New York Times last week, American public opinion has moved very strongly against staying in Afghanistan. That's a Republican and Democratic position. What's important in saying that is that the Taliban see that too. It's not a secret. Right? They recognize that as well. And the most important historical fact is they knew, just quite frankly, as the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese knew in 1972 or even 1971, that the United States was not going to stay that much longer. Whether we kept a few soldiers on the ground or not, that's still a possibility, but they knew we were pulling out, and that meant that that gave them a recruitment advantage at that moment, and there was no reason for them in any way to do things that would weaken their hand at that moment. They knew they had the stronger hand, and if I might say so, then the Trump administration went a step further and fell over itself to recognize the Taliban very early on, tried to bring them to Camp David. So everything was in their hands. Why would they help us in any way? They did the most rational thing, which was to help us leave, not to help us stay.
Okay, so is there, to answer the question specifically, is there a right way to engage in diplomacy and end a nation's presence in a war? I think the answer is yes. I think any historian of diplomacy would point to moments where two sides discussed, traded, did confidence building, and came to a compromise. This was not that. What you have just described is an opening your poker hand by showing all your cards and saying, what do you want for me to walk away from the table?
And I think that has to do with decisions that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and President Trump made to open their hands and give away the store. But it also has to do with where American public opinion is. We are a democracy, and what we forget is that countries that are dealing with us know we're a democracy. They look at where public opinion is going. And so that weakened our hand from the start.
I think a fair bit of context is that the Obama administration also tried to engage in diplomacy with the Taliban, and there, actually, it was reversed by American public opinion as the Bo Bergdahl transfer had such political backlash that literally it constrained the Obama administration from engaging with diplomacy because it became such a political liability from within the United States. But perhaps we'll transition to not the high politics, but is there a right way to leave a country when you learn that the security is collapsing in a matter of days instead of weeks or months? Maybe we could talk a little bit to what NEOs are like, General, and what the Marines can do when it's time to get all our people out, whether it's a small number or this extraordinary first in history, 130,000, 140,000 people airlifted out in a matter of weeks, which is, to my knowledge, never been done before in the history of the world.
Well, I'm not going to sit here my rule is if you're not in the room and you weren't there when the decisions and discussion was, then you need to keep quiet. And I learned in Iraq, and I wrote a paper on Iraqi lessons learned, and looking down the road. If you think you're going to go somewhere and you're not going to stay, then maybe you need to go back and ask yourself, do you really want to go? Because if you go somewhere, you're relying on the people, they trust you, you develop relationships, and even if you're doing the minimal. We can do punitive things. We normally haven't done that because we go in and we try to make it right if we break it. And this time it didn't work. Iraq was different. There was no fighting going on. We had an agreement, we had a long ramp, and we had time, and we could even drive to Kuwait. We didn't have to fly. We weren't in a landlocked country where we had to get permission from the Pakistanis to fly across their territory in a thing called the Boulevard. We had no air bases in the stands anymore. And I think the military got their orders, and they made their best military advice, whatever that is. I wasn't there, I don't know. And the commander-in-chief said to leave. I think most people, and I put myself, I think we realized, I believe that at some point the Taliban were eventually going to be successful, the reasons that we're here. Did I think it was going to happen this fast? No, I didn't. I think we were surprised. And even if there had been indications and warning, which I read in open press that there were, it would have been very difficult. So now everybody's gone. They're gone. You read, well, we should have kept Bagram. Well, that would have taken about 2,000 personnel to secure that airbase, which is about Bagram Airfield, which is about a 3-hour drive from Kabul. And I've driven that road. There's nothing there. So people are going to hike from Kabul to Bagram. But we were leaving. You can't secure an intermediate base like Bagram Airfield and leave. So I'm not making excuses. We're going to study this, and I know General Berger, the commandant, hey, let's go back and look at this. The good news, thank goodness we had a Marine Expeditionary Unit that was deployed in the theater that could rapidly get in there. We had Marines, another Marine Air Ground Task Force in Kuwait that are there working for General McKenzie, and then along with the Army units that came in, they were able to 82nd, they were rapidly able to close on the base and secure it and start it. But NEOs are never clean or pretty. Even under the best of circumstances.
Well, it's not simply a NEO, right? It's a NEO, which is a complex operation in and of itself, and it was also a withdrawal under pressure, right? So you're really doing two things at once. You're trying to evacuate civilians and others, and you were trying to withdraw your military. And I probably won't get it exactly right, but I'll paraphrase some you'll appreciate it as a military historian. So there was apparently a conversation where some of von Moltke, one of the great, someone considered one of the great captains, the conversation that during which his subordinates told him, "Hey, you will be remembered as one of the great military leaders of all time, amongst Napoleon and others," and he said no. Again, this may be apocryphal, but it's still a good story, and it communicates some truth, right? No, I won't be, because I've never conducted a withdrawal under pressure. The difficulty of that operation without the civilians is incredibly difficult. So adding both of them, I hope it provides at least a little bit of texture on how difficult this was under those conditions. So.
Thank you. So next question, again, it's mine. And when I read one of Jeremy's books out loud, Liberty's Surest Guardian, I figured maybe I shouldn't even ask this question because he's already answered it. But it seems like, at least during my lifetime of reading papers and watching conflict, every few years we decide that nation building doesn't work. And then we pull back and then we do it again. What is nation building in this context, and is it a worthy objective for the United States?
So my argument in the book, which is all about that, is, and thank you for the question, is that we can't avoid it. Because at some level, we need a world that is safe for democracy. Democracy cannot live alone. And we've tried it, not intervening in the world. We've had isolationist moments, many in our history, in fact, and they haven't worked out any better for us. The challenge is that nation building is really, really, really hard. And what I tried to argue in that book, and I still believe, and I know Aaron is working on this, so he'll correct my mistakes here with his new book, but my argument is that we can do it if we focus on a few places we really believe in. Why did we make a difference in Germany and Japan? It wasn't just that they might have been easier cases. That was not a commitment with an end date, and that was not a small commitment for Americans after the war. That was everything. That generation that lived through the Depression, fought in World War II, paid the highest marginal taxes, was paying for the Marshall Plan. They were paying to reconstruct Japan because they believed that was essential to American security. There will be moments in the future, probably the next decade, where we'll have to make those decisions. If we believe that nation building in a society, building a stable, representative government, it doesn't have to look like ours, is crucial to our security, we can make headway, but we have to be committed to it. The day we decided to go to war in Iraq, while we had just started the war in Afghanistan, made it impossible for us to do this in Afghanistan.
I'd like to add just one point to what Dr. Surya said, which is the knee-jerk response against nation building is a direct product of the time of George W. Bush campaigning explicitly against it, making it as actually the principal way he differentiated himself from Al Gore and saying, I don't believe in nation building in Kosovo and these long security operations. And the fact that he then had to turn on a dime and endorse, and lead the largest nation building endeavor that any living American really remembered was so destructive and radioactive politically that it turned the political culture into just everybody saying no to nation building. But nation building, you might as well say no to diplomacy. All of the actions we undertake with foreign states involves trading goods and resources for desired results and ends, and those results and ends are that if you continue to oppress your women, we will not give you economic support. That's nation building. If you continue to have extrajudicial killings, we will not work with your Department of Justice to apprehend common criminals. That's nation building. All of this is an attempt to make other countries cooperate with our system of diplomacy and way of seeing the world. The question we probably need to give some hard thought to is what degree of stability and security do you need to do that? If you have a society in free fall, and Somalia is a good example, Syria today is a good example, Yemen is a good example, the idea that you can both step in and protect the people militarily while also building those institutions of government has a rather miserable track record.
And do we care enough about it? It has to be a place we really care about. I mean, that's part of the point.
So no discussion, it seems like, that we can have today about modern politics, conflict, is complete without talking about China. And so there are several questions that have come in about China. Last time we had a drinking game. Every time China was mentioned in the global conflict, you had to take a drink. Gordon asked me not to do that this time. So people are concerned about, so who steps in now? Is there a void there? Does China come in because of resources that are in Afghanistan or because of its position in the region? Did we leave a void that somebody else other than Pakistan is?
Yeah, Paul, you started with this. I strongly disagree with it, but if you'd like to restate it.
I'll point to a couple things. One is it will be harder. It's hard for anybody to work in Afghanistan. It'll be hard for the Chinese to work in Afghanistan. But Zhu Bo, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, wrote a op-ed in the New York Times just a couple of days ago. So former senior military leader, Chinese military leader, and now sort of their equivalent of someone who works in a think tank, right? That was pretty brazen and ominous that China is going to step in. So I think we have left a void. Now, does that mean it's simple for them getting a bunch of Chinese contractors to go to work and not cause problems in Afghanistan? Is also difficult, equally difficult to Americans going over and working in Afghanistan. So it's not simply a void, but it is a void, and it is something to maintain contact with so that we don't lose track of.
Yeah, I think disagree with all of this. I think, look, there's all kinds of reasons to talk about why China poses national security risks to the United States. Afghanistan is not one of them at all. Yes, there's copper in Afghanistan. Yes, there are resources in Afghanistan. China has a global plan for trying to secure supply chains through the Belt and Road Initiative. Our strength to counter that has to do with our rather first-rate system of alliances and partnerships, most of which were actually encountering problems over Afghanistan. They were not sources of strength for our network of alliances. They were not sources of strength for our U.S.-Indian relations, which is perhaps the best partnership for countering China. So we could have a conversation about the risks China poses to the U.S., but the idea that they're going to swoop over the Hindu Kush to somehow control the resources of Afghanistan is not, by my lights, a concern for the United States or national security.
That's not the way I described it either. But there is a vacuum, and there will be. The vacuum may be small. Vacuums come in different sizes, right? But they have been there, and they'll continue to be there, and their participation will grow because we're not.
I think it is a vacuum, but again, the historian in me says there are vacuums and there are black holes. Yeah. And if it's a black hole and they want to go in there, you quoted von Moltke, I'll quote the people I used to play basketball with on the street in New York, right? God bless if they want to go in there, right? Let them go in. I would rather the Chinese put their resources into Afghanistan and take their resources out of the South China Sea. And I'd rather we focus on the South China Sea, which I think is much more important to us and plays to our strength in a way that Afghanistan doesn't.
Well, I would, on that last comment, I would think we should focus on this hemisphere in Africa. I mean, because the Chinese are everywhere. And quite frankly, nobody likes them because they're, the word starts with an A and ends with an E. They've tried to mine in Afghanistan, and they don't hire locals. They don't use local talent. They bring in all their own stuff, and the Taliban will learn quickly about payday loans and high interest rates and the fine print. And the Chinese will build a road that'll connect the ring road and go down into Pakistan, into Gwadar. And they'll connect the road into Iran, to Chabahar, the other ports they're building as part, as Aaron said, about the one belt, one road. But they've also got their own insurgency of Uyghurs who are Muslims in the western part of China. And I'm not sure how the Taliban are going to react to the fact that the Chinese are suppressing members of their faith. And so we'll see. We'll see. But again, I think there's other areas where we need to confront, compete, and cooperate with the Chinese. I mean, it's all three things at the same time. But I don't think Afghanistan, there is a vacuum, but I think we've got other places where we need to play the game.
One story that has gotten almost as much attention as whether nation building works or whether we left the wrong way is what about all that stuff we left for them? An enormous investment in material, advanced technology, presumably. I only know what I see in the paper, but what are the consequences of that? Just that we've better armed the...
I don't think we left anything. We didn't leave any F-35s. We didn't leave any carriers. We didn't leave any nuclear submarines. Although they did get a huge windfall of small arms, good small arms, ton of ammunition, some helicopters that the problem is all the pilots went into Tajikistan and they're trying to bring them back, whether they want them to fly or they want to exterminate them, I don't know. So a lot of the stuff, I think we've been pulling out for months, and I have to give credit for General Scott Miller. I think we've got everything out of there that we thought was of value and of high technology. Yeah, there might be some night vision devices. But the real thing is that they're going to be able to run an international arms bazaar on the black market, and it'll be a cash cow for them. Now, how much is there and how much they'll make out of that remains to be seen. But I think that's also part of the preconditions if we go back into diplomatic relations. But I don't think it's, the stuff is, it's money. We spent it. It's gone. They'll sell it or they'll try to use it, but it's not anything that's going to be of a strategic threat to the United States.
Furthermore, that's an excellent point, General. But an additional point is that in addition to any equipment and ammunition we may have left behind, which is not high tech and is not on the same sort of level as the Stinger missiles of the 80s, the bottom line is even during our 20 years of involvement, we would have 10 to 20, sometimes 30% attrition in the armed forces we were training and arming. And they often left with their own weapons. So there was loss of high quality American small arms. We're talking about rifles and pistols. That was happening during the 20 years of our involvement as well. But the fact of whether we've left some M16s or a lot of ammunition, it can provide some additional resources. But the weapons of the insurgent are IEDs and small arms like Kalashnikovs, which can be bought anywhere in the world. And there's no sense that they've got a marked military advantage because of the gear we've left behind.
So Afghanistan over its history has been kind of a black hole, not just for us, not just for the Russians, but prior to that. Are the Pakistanis right in their investment over the long term? Is this, will they be well served by their support of the Taliban over these years and continuing to prop them up? Is that the right, did they make the right bet there, or just the only one that they had?
I think the Pakistanis understand the history of that region as well as anyone else. And they're not seeking to occupy Afghanistan. They're not seeking to change Afghanistan. They're seeking to seed friends of their own in the region who will protect their interest, which means keeping India out, smuggling with them where the smuggling becomes profitable for them as well, and providing them with access to other potentially certain goods from the ground and other security issues that they want. There's nothing that they want in occupying Afghanistan itself. And the history of it as a kind of graveyard of empires is that it's been a graveyard for those who want to come from the outside and take control, but not from those who want to actually exert influence. The Mughal Empire influenced that region. They just realized very early on it's very hard to civilize it, so you stay around it. And that's what the Pakistanis are doing.
I think the real answer is it's too soon to say. The Pakistanis have given support to Islamist groups both in Afghanistan but also in Kashmir for a very long time as a deliberate strategy to frighten India away from encroachment. Those groups have sometimes been under their control and sometimes not. Those groups have almost started wars on their own. So if the Taliban and the related Haqqani network and any other Islamist group connected to the ISI remains under the control of the ISI, then perhaps they made the right gamble. But I think even they would admit we only influence, we don't control. And having religiously motivated extremist actors with no necessary compunction about dying in pursuit of a religious goal strikes me as a very volatile weapon, not just in that region, but anywhere in the world.
Thank you. So my favorite question came in just from Robin Stein recently, who said, "This has been such a great discussion, I'd like my husband to watch it later. Is there a way to do that?" So I'm going to tell you, these are all on our website, the UT system, and we will send out a note within the next couple of days how you can access all of the discussions, but including this fabulous one. And I wish you were all here with me so that they could at least hear your applause, but there are about 4 people in the studio audience, so they'll make some noise. But I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, but for mainly to those of you who served your country in the military, thank you. And for all of you who are serving the University of Texas and the people of Texas. So thanks very much.